Hi there, welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. In today's episode, we speak with Couper Samuelson about how to make sure our kids like the same films we do, so we're not stuck watching things that drive us insane. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and I'm here with Couper Samuelson, who is the head of film at Blumhouse. And we just established, we very briefly were in contact early in our careers. And I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Lovely to be here.
Awesome. My first question, what is your first movie memory?
So I don't know how old I was, but I was probably 4 or 5. And Disney used to run these, I think they were essentially clip shows that they would run on Sunday nights. And this one was called Disney's Halloween Treat. And it was basically, it took like different pieces of Disney movies, and I guess the scariest or the most Halloween-centered ones. And so they had The Escape from Bald Mountain from Fantasia was one of them. And there was a sequence from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow where the Headless Horseman throws the flaming pumpkin down the bridge. And they mashed them all up into a kind of presentation. We had it on VHS because my father had taped it off of television. So I still remember there'd be like a commercial for Jiffy that would interrupt one of them. And I used to watch that to the point where then when I saw Fantasia, I had this very weird experience where all of a sudden this one sequence I had seen 1,000 times, this Escape from Bald Mountain sequence. And I think that's my earliest memory of movies. Specifically the VHS player that would deliver this experience to me.
So horror from the start.
Yes, little did I know.
And what was your family rituals around movies, television?
Yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts in the 80s and 90s, and essentially there's no cable, and so 3 and then eventually 4 networks. And so it was entirely driven by just recording stuff off of the VHS player. And my dad, who was not very tech savvy at all, had nonetheless somehow figured out both how to put in a code when you got the TV guide. You could see there was like a little code for how to automatically record that program. And he also had managed to hook up 2 VCRs. So there was one in, I think, upstairs in our house and one downstairs. So he was able to figure out how to connect them so that we could record VHS. So when we rented something, we could record it. And so our ritual was definitely the sort of repeat viewing those things that we had recorded off of television there's a store called Videosmith that was the video store in our town. And so that it was really very intentional. There was very little like television watching. And it was like, let's sit down and watch and rewatch the same things over and over again. That was a ritual.
What type of stuff would he record?
Oh my God. It was because there was no ability to go search for stuff and select it. It was whatever the movie of the week was. I remember I had like a copy of Police Academy that was like the ABC movie of the week. Trading Places was like it was in a really thorough rotation because it was just on television. And so a lot of it was that. And then the idea of going to the video store and being able to select a movie was pretty exotic at that point. Like it was very uncommon. And so every now and then as a special treat, we get to go and actually choose a movie. But mostly it was so much easier just to take whatever VHSs we had already recorded and just go back to those. And again, my media diet was so sparse because I didn't really watch any television that even if I was going to watch something for the 11th time, it was still felt like a special treat. Anyway, that's kind of how.
Did you go to the movie theaters?
Yeah, we went to the movie theaters. I grew up in this little town called Belmont, and there was a movie theater in Cambridge that we would go to called the Fresh Pond Mall. And we definitely went to movies. I don't honestly have that many vivid memories of going to movies until I was like 8 or 9, I think. I saw RoboCop because my dad didn't really understand what it was. It's because honestly, the sort of iconography of RoboCop seems like a kid's movie iconography. Like the suit was so cool looking. And then obviously we realized pretty early in that movie that it was totally inappropriate for a 9-year-old. I think Murphy gets shot in the head. I just remember thinking, holy shit, this is not for me. But yeah, it was not until I had a little bit more agency and could actively agitate to go out to a movie that we ended up going out to a lot of movies.
And how did you discover your taste?
It was really VHS driven. And I think I was just raised. I don't think that my taste was intrinsic to me. I think it was entirely nurture. And my parents just really exposed me to mostly good movies. And so they were really into Hitchcock. So we just did a lot of Notorious, North by Northwest. I grew up playing tennis, so Strangers on a Train was like a big movie because there's that amazing tennis sequence. And so I think I was only really exposed to that. And every now and then, like, I would get my mitts on a movie that was garbage, right? Like there was a movie called The Quest. I'll never forget. I think it was when they were doing knockoffs of E.T., basically, and it was like a sort of like a JV version of E.T. And I remember being like, I think this is bad. I don't know exactly how I know that it's bad, but it's just not good. Flight of the Navigator was a little bit like that too, where you're like, it's fine, but it was like not E.T. or it was certainly not Hitchcock. So I think that because I had such an intense exposure to like really high quality movies, I could develop a little bit of a sense of garbage just in contrast to that.
And when did you know that filmmaking was a craft?
Honestly, I think it was really late. I think it was like maybe at the end of high school, figured out that these things did not just emerge fully formed from Athena from the head of Zeus. It was like a thing that had to be created, but honestly, I don't think it was until really the end of high school that I became at all aware of that. And Entertainment Weekly was a big magazine in the house. And so I would get a little bit of a feeling of behind the scenes as if there was anything behind a scene. But yeah, it was pretty late. And I was not one of these, I'm going to go with my camcorder and make movies in my backyard with my cat or whatever. I was very grateful that the movies were they emerged professionally and with production value, and I didn't have to think about how they were created.
Yeah, I also similarly, I was a ballet dancer, so I was focused on that, and I loved movies, and I enjoyed experiencing feelings and stories, and I didn't care how they were made really until college for me, and I was lucky I was exposed to international cinema, but I went to NYU, and I had friends who were film students, and I was like, oh yeah.
So but you did not go to Tisch. You were just a Gen Pop.
I was in Gallatin, which is the School of Individualized Study.
Sure.
And so I did take a number of film classes once I realized that I had an interest in it. Many classes at Tisch, but no, I was not.
Did you end up developing your thesis as a interdisciplinary thing with film, or did you just leave film as a fun little side set of classes?
I combined film and computer science. Makes a lot of sense being that I make a lot of new media work now. Yeah. Some traditional stuff and a lot of sci-fi. My interest is a lot in the sci-fi space because of having a pretty good understanding of where technology is going.
Especially right now. Have you been using ChatGPT?
Yes.
That was all ChatGPT?
Not my intro to you today, but I have a trailer that's all ChatGPT. I was like, how do I introduce the podcast about this? And it came out nice. And I edited a little bit. And I'm definitely interested in that space. And that's a whole nother conversation, but let's keep us on track. So when did you know you wanted to work in film?
The summer before my senior year of college, I had edited the art section of the school paper. And so as a result of that, there was a little mailbox that we had where all the mail would be delivered, and including the screening invitations. So this was back when, I think they sometimes do this, but they would do press screenings for college newspapers. And I would open up the little mailbox, and every time I opened it up, it was like Christmas. There would be a little envelope, and if it was like a studio, it would be like a slightly harder stock. And I would get an invitation to see About a Boy a month before it came out, or Frailty, the Bill Paxton movie, or whatever. High Fidelity, I remember I saw, I think my junior year. And I would just go and get free movies under the pretext of reviewing the movies. And sometimes I would actually legitimately review them. But that I think the sort of exposure to that definitely before a movie has come out, before it was weird to see a movie before anyone had reacted culturally to it. It was a very pure film going experience where you're just experiencing the thing itself, as opposed to, oh my God, The Lord of the Rings is a big deal now and whatever. And so that definitely, those 2 years of getting those movie invitations made me think I should do a Hollywood internship. So I interned at Warner Brothers the summer before my senior year. Actually, I interned on a Showtime television show and also Warner Brothers. And that was where I was like, okay, when I graduate, I'll try this. So that was where I had previously, I think I'd maybe thought I'm going to be a journalist or I'm going to go work at a magazine or whatever. But it was that summer that I was like, okay, let me try this. I stuck amazingly. None of the people I met as an intern are in the business anymore. Everyone is just gone. Attrition has been intense.
Yeah. In a mom text group, a bunch of women who had babies this last year, and it was like 5 of us were in a tracking board together when we were assistants, just reconnected over having kids, all still kind of industry or industry adjacent, which is weird how that brings us back together.
I have not heard the term tracking board in
lots of years. Yeah, now they use technology outside of Google Groups.
Yeah.
So is having your children like cinema important to you?
It's important to me just from a purely selfish standpoint because I want it to be good for me too. And so, so it's been definitely like from the get-go, we were extraordinarily like doctrinaire about screen time and really like there was no iPads and there was no nothing. Essentially, we really even now don't. Their media diet is they get 1 movie a weekend and then they get 2 episodes of television a weekend. And that's it as far as whatever they call filmed linear content. And so, early on, I really tried to narrow the kinds of things that they watch. So they never saw Paw Patrol and they never saw stuff that I viewed snobbily as garbage. And what we tried to do was like the UCLA Hammer Museum once a month in the Billy Wilder Theater will play Lassie Come Home or the original Richard Donner Superman or whatever. It's like a family screening. And so we do that a lot so they could get used to the idea of it's really special and you have to drive to go get it. And even and then when my youngest turned 3, I believe, then we loosened up the screen rules for airplanes where we said you can have an iPad on an airplane, but they thought that the iPads only worked when the seatbelt light turned off. They thought that's what made the iPads work. And it's honestly just been a kind of continuous attempting to create a break wall between their peers and the sort of garbage tastes of little boys in the world and my aspirations for them to get really into like good things. And so sometimes it's like the compromise ends up being like Mission Impossible Fallout, which is, in my view, a kind of cinematic masterpiece, but it still has enough just sort of general stimulation that they go with it. So that's important to me.
When did you first take your kids to the Hammer Museum, which I'm so happy to know about because I'm not too far from there and my kid's old enough.
There was a Shirley Temple movie called Animal Crackers. I think maybe they were 4 and 2 or something like that. They were really young. Yeah, I was 4 and 2. Those screenings are really good. And sometimes they have that kind of stuff at this American Cinematheque. I live right by the Egyptian, which has obviously been undergoing renovations for 3 years. But the Egyptian had a screening. I think it was a theory that they were lost Laurel and Hardy shorts. And there was a very famous one that was centered around a pie fight. It was like the first time I think that was a real innovation in like physical comedy, that someone threw a pie in the face of somebody else. That was a big moment. And there was an incredible short that I think was lost for a while. And in fact, one of the reels remains lost, but the Egyptian had put together, salvaged it and put it together. And it's actually shot at Paramount. You can tell. And it's one of the most incredible shorts. And my 2 chucklehead boy children just could not believe that adults were throwing pies at each other and hitting each other in the face. And they laughed so hard that they honestly lost their minds in the aisles of the Egyptian theater. And so Laurel and Hardy became a thing for a bit with us, where they would be really into going on Amazon Prime has a lot of really badly transferred Laurel and Hardy shorts, but those ended up being really important to them. And anyway, so so there's plenty, and especially in LA, there's plenty of these screenings of kids' movies and that they really like.
Did they mimic any of that behavior with each other?
It's hard to tell whether that behavior was conditioned upon them by Laurel and Hardy or whether that was just part of who they were. But they're two little boys, especially looking COVID. A lot of the way they would get their energy out was by beating the crap out of each other. But it was mostly, I think they mostly understood the sort of unreality of it, like the theatricality of it. Like it's not necessarily behavior that's like portable to like real life, with the exception maybe of like water balloon fights. That was the closest we came to, we're going to be permissive and like it's going to be okay for you to throw something at your brother in a way that's intended to hit him as hard as possible. But yeah, Laurel and Hardy was like that. They were really into Laurel and Hardy. And weirdly, like Marx Brothers, because Marx Brothers is so dialogue driven, they had a little more trouble like following. That was like more like puns and misunderstandings than it was about like the collision of people in physical space. But yeah.
And outside of that, is there anything you've shown them that you were surprised by their reaction?
I think generally, let me put it this way, I think that in my own experience, if your kids really see you really into something, they just osmotically become into it. So there haven't been like things that mostly they just follow along with what I'm interested in. There have been, I'm trying to think, we went through a period in COVID where because we were desperate, we made a rule that if they read a book that a movie was based on, that just unlocked that movie. And it didn't count towards their quota. Like it was like a bonus movie. And so that just opened up like a whole lane of like kind of desperation reading or whatever you call it. So they read the Ian Fleming Chitty Chitty Bang because they discovered that the movie was 2.5 hours long. And so they figure like from a return on investment, like that movie made sense. And actually the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang book is pretty good. So they really got into this movie, this Danny Boyle movie from 15 years ago called Millions, which again, I was like, this movie's okay. They were really into it because it's about kids finding a shitload of money, which for a kid that would be amazing if suddenly I could do whatever I wanted because I had millions of dollars. So they turned on that movie because the writer, Frank Cottrell Boyce, wrote the Chitty Chitty Bang sequels. The sort of the official, they had like Ian Fleming wrote the book, but then they did unofficial sequels that Frank Cottrell Boyce wrote. So anyway, they were into those books. So they're like, wow, this guy wrote another kid's book that also has a movie based on it. So anyway, Millions was one of those weird, my kids are into this random movie that I thought was only okay when it came out.
And did you find them reading a book about a movie changed their movie experience?
I think the effect of it was that they were more likely to savor it because they had paid for it in a weird way. So like we did The Princess Bride out loud. And if they got through a book that was being read to them by us, that still counted as a bonus movie. So The Princess Bride, they really were into the book, with the exception of the frame story. And the frame story of the Princess Bride novel is totally different. It's not Fred Savage and being read to as it's like an academic thing where like some academic found this old manuscript. It's not, honestly, the frame story is terrible in the book. And so we would just skip the frame story. So I only read Fezzik and Inigo and Wesley and stuff. But they were definitely like, I felt like they definitely appreciated that movie more because they understood the storytelling mechanics that were underneath it. Like they were more conscious in a way that I probably never was when I was a kid of the creation of the movie, because they had been shown the blueprints. So they could understand, like that blueprint became something. And Fezzik in the book is like Turkish. And so they'd be like, why did they change him? And I was like, so there was this wrestler in the 80s named Andre the Giant. He was French. And so he was so unique that they were like, we should hire this actor, but he can't play Turkish because he's clearly French. So they have to change the character to French. And they were like, oh, so you like that was like the idea of adaptation for them was like, oh, they had to make Fezzik French because of Andre the Giant. But they started to realize there were lots of things that you have to change when you turn something from a blueprint into an object.
I find this all really fascinating. It also sounds like it created really great conversation between you and your boys around just the stories themselves.
Oh, it's totally that kind of meta consumption of the movie that's the whole pleasure, right? Yeah, I don't weirdly feel like I'm not into the Minions or whatever. I just don't understand them, but I can see the look on their faces when they watch it. And honestly, I can't even do those movies at home. I just can't. I can't even be in the room. So in a weird way, going to a cinema and watching Sonic the Hedgehog, as painful as it is, and I think it's quite painful for me, it at least provides the kind of secondary pleasure of like they are into it. And I can be like, oh God, I can't wait for Ace Ventura to be appropriate for them, or Dumb and Dumber to be appropriate for them, so they can see, oh, like Jim Carrey can throw fastballs inside of like an object that's kind of worthy of those fastballs, as opposed to this weird Sonic the Hedgehog movie where they shot like Seattle for Hawaii, or I'm like, where does this movie take place? Anyway, whatever. It's a separate thing. Yeah. But yeah, no, the conversation is what makes it pleasurable.
The other question I've been asking, and it's because everyone I'm interviewing so far for this works in the business, that they find that their children understand the making of movies, and there's a little like less suspending of disbelief, which in some ways allows them to watch more mature content. In the 10 or so conversations I've had so far, that something is less scary because you know it's fabricated rather than just being in the moment thinking that's happening to you. Do you see that for your kids?
I don't know. I don't really have a baseline to measure that against. In general, my kids were mostly pretty taken with the scenarios on screen, and I don't think I definitely remember like the rodents of unusual size in Princess Bride. For my younger son, who was 5 at the time, it was just the music that like he was like, I'm out of this room. Tell me when that scene is over. And those are not realistic, really well rendered makeup effects, right? Those are like goofball, like dudes in rat suits. So I think that they have mostly believed the scenarios, especially in live action movies, and had them felt as if they're mostly real and not necessarily thought about the artifice of it, and not been tweaked by the artifice of it.
And how much do they understand that you make films?
Now they understand it, but now they're 9-11. They're pretty clear. They're also like, they're at school with Jason Bateman's daughter, and so they see Maple's daddy's on a sign on Ventura Boulevard. Like they are aware of. They're humans who they interface with in real life who do this other thing, which is they appear inside of movies and TV. So they're pretty aware, and my hope is that has not caused them to be cynical or to think too much about the construction or the artifice or anything like that. That they can still experience them. Like they don't think about the fact that Hawkeye, the guy who played Hawkeye, is also in Ghost Protocol. Like they still are a little surprised when I point out, oh, do you know him, right? He was Hawkeye. They like, even though it's definitely Jeremy Renner, it looks a lot like Jeremy Renner. It's not some trick.
Yeah, that's great that you've been able to keep the innocence of watching content. And it also makes sense that if they're still so taken by the screen that you wouldn't want to push content they aren't ready for.
Look, I definitely have I showed them The Fugitive 4 months ago, and it was mostly because we were on like a Harrison Ford. We'd done Clear and Present Danger and whatever, and The Fugitive was like, that did not work for them because Celia Ward's death was they just did not. That was just too much. They were so affected by that. And I didn't think about it because it was like so elliptical and it was like black and white and it was like off camera, but weirdly having Harrison Ford be so affected by his wife's death made it too real for that. Harrison Ford plays his wife's death as a harrowing, horrible situation that that my kids were just like, this is too much. So it's weird to try to figure out what is too intense and what's okay.
Do they like being scared?
I don't think they take any special. No, not really.
Yeah, like
They don't. Like, they don't. Megan. They don't. Like, they have not seen any of the movies that I've done, with the exception of kids' movies. You know, like Gem and the Holograms and Benji, and whatever. They don't. They have not watched Megan, and some of my older son's classmates have seen it. He's in 5th grade, and some of those kids have seen Megan, and he just feels like it's too much for him.
Yeah. The reason why I ask is I got Where the Wild Things Are for my son, and it's actually scary. The monsters. He's 16 months, so like.
The book or the Spike Jonze movie? Yeah, the book. Yeah, the book.
He's not quite sitting through movies yet.
I was going to say that movie. I have not shown my kids the Spike Jonze movie yet.
Yeah, no, the book, but he'll keep picking it out for me to read to him, and then when the scary part happens, he walks away and then comes back, and so I feel like he likes the idea of it, but he can't quite handle it.
I think he was probably 6 at the time, but my younger one, we had this book, Miss Nelson is Missing. You remember that book?
I don't know.
Miss Nelson is Missing is like a book about a teacher who is really sweet, and she goes away and she's replaced by Miss Viola Swamp, who's really the original teacher, but just wearing makeup and a wig. And my younger son was so freaked out by this book that he was like, he didn't want it in the house. And there was a little bit of vamping, I think, that he was doing, like a little bit of going to develop this fear. But mostly, I think my children will weaponize their respective like scaredy catness against each other. Like when I took my older son to see Coco when it was in theaters, and he was definitely a little freaked out by Coco. Like Coco was a little scary for him, and my younger one found out that my older one was freaked out by Coco. So my younger one would just sing this "Remember Me" song just to troll, just to basically scare troll. And my older son was like, "Remember me," and somebody else that. And it was just like a way of them like essentially wounding each other in a way that wasn't going to draw any blood.
Yeah, that sounds like a younger sibling. We're running out of time. And so my last question is, if you were to pick one film that I introduce my son to so he becomes a cinephile, what would you recommend and why?
To me, I think one of the greatest films ever made is Ratatouille. And Ratatouille, to me, the values of Ratatouille are really powerful. Like the idea that anyone can cook is, I think, it's like a very kind of growth mindset, like value system that obviously for kids, you want to praise effort and not achievement and all these like things. But that movie, I think, has all of the pleasures of Laurel and Hardy, like slapstick. It has some real intensity. He gets separated from his family, just like in the old Disney movies. But it's really about trying to find something that you love and doing it. And it also weirdly allows for characters to behave horribly to each other. And it destigmatizes that in a weird way, and it's okay for like people to like do bad things as long as they understand what they did and they like correct it. And I also think that like Remy is definitely like a kid figure in that he's like an adult, but he's like a kid figure. And so I think that every kid's fantasy is to stand on the head of their parent and yank their hair so that it causes their limbs to move in a certain way. That is a fantasy. And I remember when my kids were really young, I'd wake them up in the morning. My wife works really early every day, so I would do the wake up stuff. And I would do this thing when I went into their room where I would say, which curtain should I open first? And it would point at one curtain, and I would my body was being thrust in that direction because they pointed in that direction. And they got so centered from that idea of being able to exert some of their will on the world that it was like their favorite thing in the day. It's like they get to, and it's totally inconsequential. It does not matter which curtain you open first, but the idea that they had some power just mattered to them. And I think that figuring out how to expose them to movies so that they choose to eat their vegetables and they realize what kind of succor they're getting from these things is really important. And honestly, the Pixar movies, that's the closest you get now to It Happened One Night. It's the closest you get to Bringing Up Baby. And so I don't know, those seem like the most, I don't know, portable to getting them into classic movies later.
Thank you.
Final answer.
Ratatouille. I love that. I hadn't heard about it. And we cook together in the kitchen. So I think that's a good one too. Couper, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation.
Of course. Thanks for having me. And I hope it goes well. I hope that you do not have to sit through too much garbage, Rise of Gru, and train the kid well.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.